My name is Heidi Davies, and at 35 years old, I'm a Sergeant First Class in the United States Army Special Forces. I've spent my entire life learning how to systematically neutralize the enemy. But I never imagined my greatest enemy was sleeping next to me. That afternoon, I came home early, a bottle of 23-year-old Pappy Van Winkle bourbon in my hand, ready to tell my husband, Mark, the news of the biggest promotion of my career. But as I walked silently toward our bedroom, the scene that unfolded froze me in place. It wasn't just the sound of my own sister, Chloe, moaning my husband's name. It was the sight of her wearing my mother's silk robe, the one she gave me before she died, the one I'd never even dared to wear myself. And then I heard Mark's voice, a contemptuous whisper I will never forget. "She's just a soldier, Chloe. You're a real woman." They had no idea that the soldier was standing right outside the door and that the war of their lives had just begun. If you have ever been stabbed in the back by the very people you were supposed to love the most, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and get ready for a campaign called Justice. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall longleaf pines of North Carolina, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the hood of my pickup. I drove with the windows down, letting the humid, earthy air fill the cab, a rare, genuine smile on my face. In the passenger seat, carefully buckled in, was the bottle of Pappy Van Winkle. It had cost me a fortune, but it was worth it. This was a day for celebrating. After years of relentless work, of deployments that felt like they would never end, of pushing my body and mind to their absolute limits, I had finally been selected to become an instructor at the Special Warfare School. It was a career-defining promotion. I pictured Mark's face when I showed him the bourbon and the 2 plane tickets to Montana I had tucked into my pocket. I imagined us sitting on our back porch tonight, the smell of Carolina-style ribs smoking on the grill, his favorite, as we planned our trip. A real vacation, just the 2 of us under that big, open sky. For years, my life had been a series of sacrifices. Long months away from home, grueling training exercises in suffocating heat and freezing cold, the constant low-level hum of danger that becomes a part of you. But I believed it was all worth it. I thought I had everything a person could ask for, a career that filled me with pride, and a husband who was my safe harbor, my peaceful return from the storm. That fragile, beautiful peace was only minutes away from being torn to shreds, and I drove toward it, completely, blissfully unaware. The first thing that hit me when I walked through the front door was the silence. It was the wrong kind of silence. Not the empty, peaceful quiet of an empty house, but a heavy, waiting silence. My training, the instincts honed over a decade of reconnaissance and threat assessment, took over before my conscious mind even knew what was happening. My body went on high alert. There, by the door, was a pair of men's shoes. Black Allen Edmonds Oxfords. Not Mark's. He lived in worn-out leather boots and running shoes. On the banister of the staircase, a contractor's blazer was slung carelessly, its fabric a sleek, corporate gray that was out of place in our rustic home. Then the smell hit me. A cloyingly sweet perfume, a vanilla and gardenia blend that clung to the air. It wasn't mine. My scent was soap, gunpowder, and the faint, clean smell of cedar from my closet. My heart began to beat faster, a hard, rhythmic thumping against my ribs. It wasn't fear. It was the cold, adrenaline-fueled alarm that signals contact with the enemy. Every step I took on the hardwood floor was silent, deliberate, my weight balanced on the balls of my feet. I was no longer a wife coming home. I was an operator clearing a structure. My eyes scanned every detail as I moved down the hallway, past the gallery of our wedding photos. There we were, smiling in our dress blues and my white gown. A monument to a promise that now felt like a cruel joke. I had trained for ambushes, for IEDs, for threats that came from the shadows. I was prepared for anything, except for the truth that was waiting for me upstairs. As I neared the top of the stairs, I heard it. First, just a muffled sound, indistinct. But then, a voice. My sister Chloe's voice, high-pitched and simpering in a way that always set my teeth on edge. And then, through the bedroom door, which was cracked open just an inch, I saw it all. Chloe was wearing my mother's pearl white silk robe. The one my mom wore in the hospital during her last days, the one she made me promise to wear on a night that was truly special. A violent, icy rage, colder and sharper than any fear I'd ever known, shot through my veins. This wasn't just an affair, this was a desecration, a violation of something sacred. And then Mark's voice, low and conspiratorial, dripping with a disdain I'd never heard from him before. "She's just a soldier, Chloe. You're a real woman." That sentence didn't make me cry. It did something far worse. It was like a clean, perfect shot to the heart of the woman I was, the wife who loved him. It killed her instantly. And in her place, the soldier rose up, fully awake and in command. The pain didn't vanish. It crystallized. It sharpened into a singular point of focus. The objective was now clear. The enemy had been identified. My training screamed at me, "Do not engage. Do not rush the objective without intelligence. Direct confrontation leads to chaos, loss of advantage." Instead of bursting through the door, I took one silent step back, then another. My movements were fluid, economical, devoid of emotion. I retreated into the guest bathroom across the hall, closing the door behind me without a sound. My heart was no longer racing. It was a block of ice in my chest. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I navigated to the voice recorder app and hit the red button. I stood there, motionless, leaning against the cool tile wall, capturing the sounds of their betrayal. Every second of the recording was another piece of evidence, another round of ammunition. Each moan, each whispered lie, forged my resolve into something unbreakable. This was no longer a broken marriage. It was a mission. And as I stood there in the silent darkness, I gave that mission a name. Operation Downfall. I would not cry. I would not scream. I would plan. I would execute. My pain had just been given a purpose, and that purpose was their systematic and total destruction. After they left, the house was finally silent again, but the silence was now tainted, poisoned. I didn't sleep. Instead, I went to my study. The small room, once a sanctuary filled with books on military history and maps of far-off lands, now became my tactical operations center. My heavy oak desk was the command post. I plugged in my encrypted hard drive, connected my burner phone, and powered up my laptop. The first order of business was securing the intelligence I had just gathered. I uploaded the audio file from my phone to a secure anonymous cloud server. Evidence logged, assets secured. I began to work, letting the cold logic of my training take over. I opened a link analysis program and started building a network map, connecting the data points. Mark's suspicious business trips over the last 6 months. Chloe's sudden, intense interest in attending military contractor events near DC. Each piece of information was a node, and as I drew the lines between them, a clear picture of a coordinated deception began to emerge. But as I worked, the image of Chloe in that pearl-white silk robe kept flashing in my mind's eye, a persistent, burning afterimage. And it dragged another memory up from the depths, a much older wound I had tried to bury for over 20 years. The memory of a gold medal and the suffocating heat of a Virginia summer. I was 12 years old. That summer was my entire world. I woke up at 5 a.m. every single day, the sky still a soft pre-dawn gray, to ride my bike to the community pool. I swam laps until my muscles burned with a fiery ache and my lungs felt raw. I spent hours practicing my flip turns until they were seamless, my skin tanned to a dark bronze from the relentless sun, the smell of chlorine permanently etched into my hair. My goal was singular, the gold medal in the 100-meter freestyle at the county championship. And I won it. I remember the weight of it around my neck, the rough texture of the blue ribbon, the overwhelming feeling that for once all my hard work had paid off in a way everyone could see. My joy lasted for exactly 1 day. The next morning, it was gone from the velvet box on my dresser. I found it around the neck of my 9-year-old sister, Chloe, as she was about to leave for school. She was parading in front of the mirror, telling her reflection about how she had won the big swim meet. When I confronted her, hot tears of rage and disbelief stinging my eyes, she just pouted. And then my parents intervened. Chloe just admires you, honey, my mother said in that placating tone she always used, as if my feelings were a minor inconvenience. She looks up to her big sister. I look to my father, a retired Army colonel, a man whose respect I craved more than anything. I expected him to understand discipline, to understand the value of something earned. Instead, his jaw tightened. He looked at me, not with sympathy, but with disappointment. "You're the strong one, Heidi," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Let her have it, don't be so selfish." I had to stand there, mute and shaking with a helpless fury, and watch my little sister wear my achievement to school. I had to listen to her receive praise for the victory that my aching muscles and burning lungs had earned. I was the strong one. And being the strong one meant my accomplishments were disposable, my feelings were irrelevant, and my role was to silently give, while Chloe's role was to gracefully take. Staring at the glowing computer screen in my study, the years collapsed. I saw it with the stark, brutal clarity of a satellite image. My entire life had been a replay of that exact pattern. I was always the one to push harder, to sacrifice more, to carry the weight. I joined the army, chasing my father's approval, while Chloe pursued a career as a military spouse influencer, monetizing the very sacrifices I and so many others were actually making. I was the workhorse. Chloe was the beneficiary, the one who was coddled, protected, and forgiven for everything. And Mark? He fit the pattern perfectly. He loved the benefits of my strength, the status of being married to a Green Beret, the financial security, the respect it got him in his line of work. But he resented the independence that came with it. He didn't want an equal partner. He wanted a woman he could protect, a damsel to his knight. He wanted the idea of a strong woman, but not the reality of one who didn't actually need him. This betrayal wasn't a singular event. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being minimized by the people who were supposed to love me most. A quiet, determined whisper escaped my lips. Enough. There will not be a next time. There were no tears. Crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, a weakness the mission did not allow. Instead, a cold, ruthless clarity settled over me. My past had taught me one invaluable lesson. Pleading my case to them, asking for fairness, was a waste of breath. They would just tell me I was being selfish again. The only way to win was to be stronger, smarter, and more ruthless than they could ever imagine. I turned my attention to Mark's personal laptop, which sat on the corner of the desk. I tried one password. His birthday. Denied. Our anniversary. Denied. Then a bitter thought crossed my mind. I typed CHLOE0814. Her birthday. Access granted. A humorless, brittle smirk touched my lips. Inside, it was a goldmine of carelessness. Hotel receipts for 2 on his solo business trips. Gushing emails. A search history that painted a vivid picture of their affair. My enemy was sloppy. I began the meticulous process of cataloging everything, creating folders, labeling files. Each file was a round in the chamber. Each piece of evidence was a pin pulled from a grenade. If you've ever been told you're the strong one, and that meant you had to silently endure injustice while someone else got a pass, please support this story by hitting the like button and let me know in the comments. Just type the word "strong" below so I know you're out there. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, a sense of grim purpose guiding me. The memories that had once been a source of deep, aching sadness were now being weaponized. The pain was being converted into fuel. The past was no longer a burden. Now, it was a map to victory. The next 72 hours blurred into a haze of caffeine and hyper-focused intensity. My life split into 2 irreconcilable realities. By day, I was Sergeant First Class Davies. I drove to Fort Bragg, my uniform immaculate, my posture perfect. I ran my training cadres through drills, sat in strategy meetings, and accepted congratulations for my promotion with a mechanical smile. I performed my duties with flawless efficiency, my face an unreadable mask. My colleagues saw what they always saw: a dedicated soldier, disciplined and in control. They had no idea the real war wasn't in some distant desert, but in the hollowed-out shell of my own home. When night fell, the soldier remained, but the mission changed. My house transformed into a clandestine intelligence analysis cell. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My diet was black coffee, brewed thick as sludge, and chalky protein bars I chewed without tasting. The nights were a silent, relentless grind. Hunched over my laptop, the screen's glow casting long shadows, I sifted through the digital wreckage of my life. I meticulously cross-referenced every line on Mark's credit card statements. A charge for a boutique hotel in Arlington, Virginia, on a date he was supposedly on a work trip to San Diego. A quick search of Chloe's social media revealed a post from that same weekend. A picture of two champagne flutes, captioned, "A lonely girl's weekend in the city." The lies were so blatant. I compiled the data into a detailed timeline, a spreadsheet that became a damning indictment of their deception. A physical exhaustion, deep and gnawing, settled into my bones. My eyes burned and a dull ache throbbed at the base of my skull. But a Green Beret is taught to compartmentalize pain, to file it away and continue the mission. So I pushed it down, ignored my body's protest, and continued to work. I was alone, completely alone, on the loneliest mission of my life. On the third night, my phone buzzed. The vibration unnervingly loud in the dead silence. It was my mother. For a single, stupid heartbeat, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe she knows. Maybe she felt something was wrong. It was a foolish, childish thought. I let it ring twice more before answering, my voice neutral. "Hi, Mom." "Heidi, honey, how are you? I heard about your promotion. That's just wonderful," she chirped, her voice bright and distant. "Listen, I'm calling about Chloe." Of course she was. The flicker of hope died, leaving a cold ash. "The poor thing is just so stressed out lately with these new influencer contracts. It's a lot of pressure. You know how sensitive she is." Her voice was laced with that familiar concern she reserved exclusively for my sister. Then came the words, the casual phrase that was the story of my life. "You're her big sister, and you're a soldier. You're stronger. Could you keep an eye on her for me? Maybe give her a call this weekend, just to cheer her up." My hand tightened around the phone, my knuckles turning bone white. The sheer audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. She wanted me, the woman whose life was being destroyed by Chloe, to cheer her up. The request was so profoundly insulting, it transcended cruelty. They weren't just betraying me, they expected me to help them do it. To them, I wasn't a person, I was a utility, the strong one, the fixer, the soldier who could absorb any blow and still be expected to stand guard. I took a slow, controlled breath. "I'll look into it," I said, my voice flat and cold. Then I hung up. The silence that flooded the room afterward was heavier than before. It was the crushing silence of being invisible to the people who were supposed to see me most clearly. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't sit still. The rage, so tightly compressed, was now a volatile core inside me. Before dawn, sleep still a stranger, I laced up my running shoes. I needed to move. I needed pain. I ran out into the pre-dawn gloom, hitting the familiar trails that snaked through the pine forests around Fort Bragg. The humid North Carolina air, thick as a blanket, filled my lungs. I ran without thinking, pushing myself harder, my feet pounding a furious rhythm against the damp earth. I ran until my thighs burned and my breath came in ragged gasps. Every brutal footfall was a scream I couldn't release. Deo presso liber, the Special Forces motto, echoed in my head. To free the oppressed. All my career, I had fought to liberate others. Now, the only person left to liberate was myself. The physical agony was a cleansing fire, burning away the hurt and confusion. As the first rays of the sun cut through the trees, I finally stopped, bent over with my hands on my knees, sweat pouring from me. The exhaustion was gone. The emotional turmoil was gone. All that remained was a cold, pure, and unshakable resolve. I returned to my command center with a new clarity. The hunt was almost over. I made one last call to an old friend from a joint ops assignment, a guy now in the quiet world of cybersecurity. My request was simple. "I have a security concern regarding a defense contractor," I told him. "I need to see some deleted emails from their server. It's a matter of operational integrity." He didn't ask questions. In our world, you didn't have to. Hours later, an encrypted file appeared in my inbox. And there it was. The final piece. The kill shot. An email chain between Mark and Chloe. In it, Mark, using his high-level security clearance, had forwarded proprietary information about an upcoming Department of Defense contract. Technical specs, budget ceilings, evaluation criteria. He was feeding her insider information, giving her an illegal advantage. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a felony, a breach of national security. It was everything I needed. Not just enough to end a marriage. This was enough to obliterate their careers, their reputations, and their futures. The mission had changed. The intelligence gathering phase was over. The direct action phase was about to begin. Once the final piece of evidence was secured, the adrenaline that had sustained me for 3 days vanished, leaving a terrifying void in its place. The mission was complete, but there was no sense of victory. There was only a profound, hollow exhaustion that settled deep in my soul. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, its silence suffocating me with the ghosts of dirty secrets. I couldn't stay there another second. The walls felt like they were closing in, every photograph on the wall a mocking reminder of the life I thought I had. I grabbed my keys, got in my truck, and just drove. I had no destination. I was just running from the silence. My truck carried me through the familiar, gritty streets of Fayetteville, past the neon glow of pawn shops and dimly lit bars that catered to soldiers on leave. The city lights blurred into a meaningless smear of color. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the gravel parking lot of a small, unassuming 24/7 diner tucked away on a side road. It was the kind of place that felt like it had existed forever, with a faded sign, coffee that was always brewing, and cracked red vinyl on the booth seats. All I wanted was to be in a place with the low hum of human activity, the clatter of plates, the murmur of conversation. Anything to drown out the oppressive quiet of my own thoughts. I slid onto a stool at the counter, feeling more exhausted and invisible than I ever had in my life. A waitress with a kind, tired face and a name tag that read, Brenda, came over. "What can I get for you, hun?" she asked, her voice raspy from years of taking orders. "Just black coffee and a short stack of pancakes," I said, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. I wasn't hungry, not really, but I needed the anchor of doing something normal, something mundane. I needed to pretend for just a few minutes that I was just another person stopping for a late-night meal. A few stools down from me sat an older gentleman, probably in his late 70s. He wore a simple flannel shirt and a faded green baseball cap with the iconic eagle, globe, and anchor emblem of the U.S. Marine Corps. A Vietnam veteran. His eyes were clear and calm, and he took in the whole room with a quiet, observant gaze. He wasn't staring, but I could feel his awareness of me. It wasn't the curious, intrusive look of a stranger trying to figure you out. It was something else, something deeper. An expression of quiet, knowing recognition. He saw the way I sat ramrod straight, even on a diner stool. He saw the unconscious way my eyes scanned the room, clocking the exits, assessing the other patrons out of pure habit. And he saw the look in my eyes, what soldiers call the 1,000-yard stare. That distant, haunted look of someone carrying a weight too heavy to put into words. He had seen that look before. He had probably seen it in the mirror. He had seen it in the eyes of his brothers. Brenda brought my pancakes, and I ate them slowly, methodically, without really tasting them. The warmth of the coffee cup in my hands was a small comfort. When I was finished, I signaled for the check. Brenda came over, but instead of a bill, she gave me a warm smile. "It's already been taken care of, hun," she said, nodding down the counter. "The gentleman paid for you." I looked over, surprised. The old Marine met my gaze and gave me a slight, respectful nod. He pushed himself up from his stool and walked over, his movements stiff but deliberate. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't offer any empty platitudes. He simply placed a calloused, steady hand on my shoulder. His touch was firm and grounding. He leaned in slightly, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a profound understanding. "Sometimes the toughest battles are the ones we fight at home. You stand tall." And with that, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving me sitting there, completely stunned, the warmth of his hand still lingering on my shoulder. For the first time in days, the ironclad discipline I'd wrapped around myself finally cracked. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or self-pity. It was a tear of overwhelming, gut-wrenching gratitude. A complete stranger had given me more recognition, more respect, and more genuine compassion in those 30 seconds than my own family had shown me in a lifetime. He saw me not as a tool, not as the strong one, but as a fellow soldier, a peer, a member of the same tribe bound by an unspoken code of honor. His words, "Stand tall," weren't a suggestion. They were an order, a command from one warrior to another. And his simple act of kindness didn't make me feel weaker. It did the opposite. It was like a lifeline, a sudden resupply of the spiritual and emotional strength I thought had been completely depleted. It refilled the reservoir. I wiped the tear away with the back of my hand and took a deep, steadying breath. The fog of exhaustion and despair began to lift, replaced by the cold, clear focus I knew so well. I had my orders. It was time to return to base. It was time to prepare for contact. The battle at home was about to begin. After the encounter at the diner, I returned home with a newfound sense of calm. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a cold, hard clarity. The emotional storm had passed, leaving a quiet, resolute purpose in its wake. There was no more urgency, no more frantic energy. The plan was complete. The evidence was compiled, encrypted, and backed up in 3 separate locations. The timing of the attack would be of my own choosing. I was in control. I spent that evening reclaiming my space, performing a series of rituals to impose order on the chaos that had invaded my life. I methodically cleaned the house, scrubbing away the lingering scent of Chloe's perfume until all that remained was the clean smell of lemon polish and antiseptic. I broke down my service rifle, cleaning each component with practiced efficiency, the familiar scent of gun oil filling the air. I laid out my dress uniform, brushing away any specks of dust, aligning the creases with military precision. This was my pre-mission prep. I was preparing for battle, both mentally and physically. The silence from Mark and Chloe over the past few days had been telling. I knew it wasn't the silence of remorse or guilt. It was the silence of arrogance. They were operating under the assumption that I was oblivious, that their secret was safe, and that I was the same predictable, dutiful wife I had always been. They had made a critical, and soon-to-be fatal error. They had profoundly underestimated their adversary. They thought they were playing a game against a wife, but they were about to find themselves in a war with a soldier. Just as I was finishing, my phone rang, shattering the quiet. The caller ID flashed, Mark. I took a deep, centering breath, the kind I take before breaching a door. I swiped to answer and activated the call recording app. "Hello, Mark," I said, my voice perfectly level. His voice on the other end was sickeningly sweet, a syrupy, artificial tone that made my stomach turn. "Heidi, baby, just calling to see how you're doing. I know you've been so busy with work lately, but don't forget that family is the most important thing," he began, the condescension dripping from every word. My mind immediately flagged it. Tactic? Feigned concern to establish a baseline of normalcy. He continued, his voice oozing with false sentiment. "This weekend is Mom and Dad's 40th anniversary party. You know how much this means to them. They'd be heartbroken if we didn't show up together, as a team." Tactic. Leveraging a significant family event to apply emotional pressure and guilt. I already told Chloe she could help us pick out a surprise gift for them. Tactic. Brazenly inserting the co-conspirator into the conversation to test for reactions and normalize her presence. Every word he spoke was a calculated move in a psychological game I knew all too well. I listened silently, my mind dissecting his strategy with cold detachment. This was a classic interrogation technique, something straight out of my SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. A captor will often attempt to create a false sense of normalcy, using emotional appeals and the pretense of kindness to break a prisoner's resolve. They try to make you believe that compliance is the only reasonable path. Mark wasn't just my unfaithful husband. In this moment, he was my captor, and he was treating me like a fool. He wasn't just betraying me, he was insulting my intelligence. The rage inside me didn't flare up. It compressed. It cooled, hardening into a razor-sharp shard of ice in my chest. He thought this was a negotiation. He was wrong. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I responded, my voice completely devoid of the emotion he was trying to provoke. "I'll be there," I stated, each word clipped and precise. "We need to talk, all three of us." The lack of emotion seemed to throw him off. He had expected tears, or anger, or accusations. He hadn't expected calm clinical acceptance. "Oh, yeah, of course," he stammered, clearly trying to regain his footing. "Great. I'll see you then." He hung up, likely still believing he had successfully managed the situation, that his little domestic drama was still under his control. The moment the call ended, I stood up. That was it. The final straw. His breathtaking arrogance, his attempt to weaponize my own parents' anniversary against me, had erased any last, lingering trace of doubt I might have had. They weren't sorry. They were plotting. They were planning to stand beside me at a sacred family event, smiling for pictures, while continuing their sordid affair behind my back. They were going to turn my parents' celebration of a lifetime of loyalty into a stage for their own disgusting theater of lies. I walked to my desk and opened the master file on my laptop, the one labeled Operation Downfall. I pulled up a new text message on my burner phone, addressing it to both Mark and Chloe. The message was short and unambiguous. Mission brief, my house, 1900 hours tonight. Be there. This is not a request. I hit send. There was no turning back now. The time for surveillance and planning was over. The time for appeasement and silence was a lifetime ago. The confrontation phase of the operation had officially begun. At 1900 hours sharp, the doorbell rang. Mark strolled in, a mask of cocky self-assurance plastered on his face. He was still playing the part of the slightly annoyed but ultimately indulgent husband. He even tried to make a joke. "What's with the secret meeting, Sergeant?" he asked with a smirk, trying to reclaim control of the situation. I didn't smile. I didn't even react. I simply pointed to the leather sofa. "Sit down." My tone, flat and devoid of any warmth, wiped the smirk off his face. He sat. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. It was Chloe, looking nervous, her eyes darting around the room before landing on Mark in a silent plea for help. He offered her a weak, reassuring smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I had prepared the battlefield. The living room was neat, sterile, and impersonal. On the coffee table, I had arranged 3 lowball glasses with 3 large ice cubes in each, a bottle of bourbon sitting beside them. My laptop was open, its screen dark. The air in the room was thick with a tension so heavy it felt like you could taste it. I remained standing, dressed in a clean, crisp set of Army combat fatigues. My posture was parade ground perfect. In this room, I was not a wife or a sister. I was the commanding officer. They were not family. They were subordinates, summoned for a disciplinary hearing. I let the silence stretch for a full minute, watching them squirm, before I began. "Welcome," I said, my voice as calm and measured as if I were giving a briefing at the Pentagon. "To the after-action report on the systemic failure of this marriage and our familial relationship." Their faces went slack with shock. Chloe's jaw dropped, and Mark's confident facade crumbled into confusion. I gave them no time to recover. "Topic: coordinated deceit and betrayal," I continued, my eyes locking onto each of them in turn. I reached for my phone, which was connected to a small Bluetooth speaker on the table. I pressed play. The sounds of my sister moaning my husband's name filled the room, amplified and undeniable. Chloe's face turned a ghostly white. Mark looked like he had been physically struck, his mouth hanging open in stunned disbelief. After 15 seconds of the most damning audio, I hit pause. The ensuing silence was more deafening than the recording itself. "Acoustic evidence," I stated flatly. Next, I turned the laptop toward them. I clicked the spacebar, and the screen lit up with the first slide of a simple, brutal presentation. It was a screenshot of a hotel bill from Arlington for a king suite on a weekend Mark was supposed to be in California. Click. The next slide, a map pinpointing the location of a private apartment in Arlington, rented under a false name but paid for by Mark's corporate card. Click. The final slide in this section, a series of crystal-clear, high-resolution photographs of the two of them, kissing passionately on the sidewalk just outside the U.S. Capitol building. Mark finally found his voice, a desperate, strangled sound. "Heidi, wait, I can explain." I held up a single hand, a gesture that cut him off instantly. Negative. The time for explanations is over. Chloe predictably dissolved into tears, the weapon she had wielded her entire life. "You've always had everything," she wailed, her voice thick with practiced victimhood. "The career, Dad's respect. I never had anything. I just wanted to be happy for once." I turned my full attention to her, my gaze as cold and hard as steel. "Happiness," I said, my voice low and seething with a controlled fury, "is not built on the wreckage of other people's lives. That isn't happiness, that's parasitism. And your time as a parasite is over." I hit the spacebar one last time. A new slide appeared, showing the damning email chain. The one with the leaked contract information. "And this," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "is where this operation moves beyond personal betrayal and becomes a matter of national security." The color drained from both of their faces. The fake tears on Chloe's cheeks dried up, replaced by the pale mask of genuine terror. This was the moment my instructor at the Special Warfare School had talked about. Don't argue with the enemy. Present them with the undeniable reality of their untenable position and then watch them collapse. I pushed myself off the wall and began to pace slowly in front of them, like a predator circling its cornered prey. "The debrief is concluded. The verdict has been rendered. The following are your direct orders." I stopped and looked directly at Mark. 1. The divorce papers have been filed. They cite the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement. You will leave this marriage with nothing. 2. You have 24 hours to vacate this military housing. Your personal effects will be boxed up and shipped to whatever godforsaken address you choose. If you are not gone by 1900 hours tomorrow, I will have the MPs escort you off this base. I then turned to Chloe. 3. You are permanently barred from this property and any other property I own. If you attempt to contact me or come near me, I will file a restraining order. And 4, I said, looking back and forth between their horrified faces. At 800 hours tomorrow morning, a full intelligence packet detailing your unethical and potentially illegal activities will be delivered to the board of directors of every one of Chloe's corporate sponsors and to the head of security at Mark's firm. The begging started then, a pathetic, desperate torrent of, "Heidi, please, and don't do this," and "You're destroying our lives." But I wasn't listening anymore. I was already gone. If you have ever had that one moment where you finally stood up and said no more, hit that like button to stand with me. And if you believe that justice is worth fighting for, no matter the cost, comment with a single word: justice. I walked to the front door and held it open. "This is not a negotiation," I said, my voice ringing with the finality of a death sentence. "These are the consequences. Your mission was to protect this family. You both failed spectacularly. The debrief is over. Dismissed." After Mark and Chloe scrambled out of my house, their faces etched with terror, I didn't stay to savor the victory. The house was no longer a home. It was a cleared objective, a secured battlefield. Lingering there felt wrong. I needed a new command post, a neutral location to execute the next phase of the operation. I drove the 20 minutes to Southern Pines, the charming town neighboring Fort Bragg, known for its golf courses and quiet, old-money atmosphere. I found what I was looking for: a dimly lit, wood-paneled bar that was a well-known refuge for retired military officers and veterans. It was the kind of place where a woman could sit alone in a corner booth and not be bothered. I ordered a glass of Macallan 18, a deliberate choice, a quiet acknowledgement that this was a significant moment, and opened my encrypted laptop. The soft sounds of a live blues trio playing in the corner provided the perfect ambient noise for the work ahead. The judgment phase was over. Now it was time for the sentencing. There was no more rage, no more pain, just a cold, clear focus. There was no hesitation, no mercy. There was only the mission. My strategy was based on a fundamental principle of information warfare I had learned years ago. You don't attack an enemy's strengths, you attack their centers of gravity. For Mark, his entire career, his entire identity, was built on his top-secret security clearance. For Chloe, her carefully curated empire was built on the financial backing of her sponsors. Those were my targets. Target Package 1. Mark. His security clearance was his lifeline. I pulled up the contact information for Colonel Miller, U.S. Army, retired. He was the facility security officer, the FSO, at Mark's defense contracting firm. More importantly, he was an old friend of my father's, a man from a generation that viewed honor as a non-negotiable currency. I stepped outside into the cool night air to make the call. He answered on the second ring. "Heidi, daughter, it's been too long," he said, his voice warm and familiar. My voice, in contrast, was all business. Cold, professional, and precise. "Colonel, I apologize for the late call. I'm reporting a significant security concern involving one of your employees, Mark." I didn't use his last name. I didn't have to. And I certainly didn't mention he was my husband. This wasn't a domestic dispute, it was a security report. I laid out the facts in a calm, concise manner. The employee in question has falsified federal travel vouchers for personal travel, maintained an inappropriate and undeclared relationship with a subcontractor, and, most critically, has potentially compromised sensitive contract information via unauthorized electronic transfer. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the years of command experience in that silence. He was processing, analyzing, connecting dots. When he finally spoke, the warmth was gone from his voice, replaced by a tone of cold steel. "Sergeant," he said, the formal title a clear acknowledgement that this was now an official matter. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Consider the issue handled. Give my regards to your father." The line went dead. That was it. No further questions were needed. He had all the information required to initiate an immediate security review. I knew with absolute certainty that as of that moment, Mark's access to any classified material was suspended. His security clearance, the foundation of his entire professional life, had just been indefinitely frozen. The first domino had fallen. Target Package 2. Chloe. Her military spouse influencer brand was her center of gravity, a fragile empire built on a lie. I returned to my booth and pulled up the intelligence file I had built on her. The largest of her sponsors was a major national bank that prided itself on its deep ties to the military community. I had the direct line for their vice president of public relations, a sharp woman named Susan Henderson, whom I'd met at a base charity event. I made the call. "Ms. Henderson, this is Sergeant First Class Heidi Davies," I began, my voice polite but firm. "I'm calling you today in my capacity as an active duty soldier and as Chloe's sister. It is my unfortunate duty to inform you that the public image she has cultivated for your brand is in direct and fraudulent opposition to her personal conduct, which has been instrumental in the destruction of a military family." While I spoke, I sent her a password-protected email. "I have just sent you a file containing irrefutable evidence to support this claim," I added. "I believe it will be of great interest to your brand's integrity committee." The response was swift and exactly what I'd anticipated. There was a shocked silence, followed by the cold, calculated tone of corporate damage control. "Sergeant Davies," she said, her voice now sharp and focused, "we are deeply disturbed by this information. Our brand has a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. The contract will be terminated, effective immediately." I repeated the process twice more with her other key sponsors, a lifestyle apparel company and a meal kit delivery service. Each call was a precise, surgical strike. The dominoes were now falling in rapid succession. Final target: scorched earth. The last step was to ensure there was no recovery, no path back for either of them. I opened a secure, anonymous email client. My target was a journalist I knew by reputation, a relentless investigative reporter for a major national newspaper who specialized in sniffing out corruption in the defense industry. The email I composed was a masterpiece of brevity and implication. Subject: a tip. Body: start digging into the expense reports of senior executives at Mark's company name and their relationships with subcontractors, specifically those in the influencer space. There's a major scandal there waiting to be uncovered. I didn't include names. I didn't include evidence. I just planted the seed. I knew this reporter's reputation. He was a bloodhound. He would follow the scent. This single email would do more than just get Mark fired. It would create a cloud of suspicion over the entire company, making Mark radioactive. He would be blacklisted, unemployable in the industry he had built his life around. Forever. I hit send, then closed the laptop. I picked up my glass and drained the last of the smooth, smoky bourbon. The blues trio was playing a low, mournful tune. It was the perfect soundtrack. The sentencing was complete. The execution phase of the operation was over. All that was left was to watch the aftermath. The next morning, I was at my desk at Fort Bragg by 800 hours, reviewing lesson plans for an upcoming class. The world outside my office was calm, orderly, and blissfully unaware of the synchronized demolition I had set in motion less than 12 hours before. I had fired the missiles. Now, I would simply monitor the incoming reports of direct hits. The first impact report came via a text from a former colleague who now worked at Mark's company. It read, "All hell just broke loose here. You won't believe what's happening with Mark." At that exact moment, at 8:30 a.m., Mark was walking through the lobby of his office building, trying to project an aura of normalcy. He had a venti latte in one hand and was nodding at colleagues, the picture of a man in control. He'd just received an email summoning him to an urgent meeting with Colonel Miller and HR. But he likely assumed it was a standard, if annoying, corporate procedure. He walked into the conference room, and the blood drained from his face. Colonel Miller was there, his expression grim. The head of HR was there, refusing to make eye contact. And sitting at the polished mahogany table were two other men in dark, conservative suits that screamed, "Federal Government." There were no pleasantries. Colonel Miller didn't even offer him a seat. "Mark," he said, his voice flat, "these are investigators from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. They have some questions for you regarding your travel expenses and contractor relations." As if on cue, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a fraud alert from his bank. "Notice, your joint account has been frozen pending review." He fumbled to silence it, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. As the investigators began their questioning, a uniformed security guard entered the room and placed a cardboard box on the table. A second guard quietly deactivated Mark's security badge from a remote terminal. 15 minutes later, the man who had walked in as a respected senior executive was escorted out of the building like a common criminal, carrying the pathetic contents of his desk in a box, under the shocked and curious stares of everyone he had ever worked with. A 15-year career, vaporized in 15 minutes. While Mark's world was imploding in North Carolina, the shockwave hit Arlington, Virginia. Chloe was just waking up in her chic, overpriced apartment, probably scrolling through her phone for morning engagement metrics. But instead of fawning comments and likes, she was met with a digital firestorm. The first email was from her largest sponsor, the military-focused bank. The subject line was cold and direct. Immediate termination of contract. The body of the email was even more brutal, citing a morals clause violation and demanding the immediate repayment of her most recent quarterly advance. Before she could even process it, another email arrived. Then, another. The apparel brand, the meal kit company, all terminating their contracts, effective immediately. Her business partners, the photographers and social media managers who helped build her facade, were flooding her with panicked text messages demanding to know what was going on. She scrambled to open her Instagram page, the carefully curated shrine to her fictional life as the perfect military spouse. It was a war zone. The comment sections of her latest posts, once filled with heart emojis and praise, were now a torrent of accusations and disgust. News travels fast in the tight-knit online military community. Rumors were already swirling, and her followers, the very people she had built her empire on, were turning on her with breathtaking speed. Her digital kingdom was burning to the ground in real time. Back in my quiet office at Fort Bragg, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Chloe. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, the notification for a new message popped up. I put the phone on my desk, turned on the speaker, and continued my work as her voice, shrill and unrecognizable, filled the room. Gone was the sweet, simpering girl. In her place was a panicked, hysterical stranger. "Heidi, what did you do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with sobs. "They're suing me. My sponsors are dropping me. I'm ruined. You can't do this to me. I'm your sister. Please, Heidi, call them. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I'm begging you." I listened to the entire rambling message, my face completely impassive. When her desperate, gasping pleas finally ended, I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second before I pressed a single button. Delete. No hesitation, no regret. As far as I was concerned, the person on that recording no longer existed. By noon, the final missile found its mark. The article from my journalist contact went live on a highly respected defense news website. It was a masterpiece of professional destruction. It didn't mention Mark by name, of course, but it didn't need to. It described in meticulous detail an ongoing internal investigation into a senior executive at a major North Carolina-based defense contractor for gross misuse of corporate funds and significant security breaches. In the small insular world of the defense industry, the details were specific enough that everyone knew exactly who and what the article was about. Mark wasn't just fired, he was now publicly disgraced, blacklisted. The door to his entire world had just been slammed, bolted, and welded shut. In less than 24 hours, the lives they had built on lies and betrayal had been systematically and completely dismantled. Their careers, their finances, their reputations, all reduced to ash. The mission was a success. The battlefield was clear. In the days following the detonation, a strange, heavy silence descended. The frantic, pleading voicemails from Chloe stopped. The angry, accusatory texts from Mark ceased. They had simply vanished, swallowed whole by the consequences they had created. The war was over, the battlefield was quiet, but I didn't feel the euphoria of victory I had expected. Instead, I felt a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. It wasn't physical, it was a spiritual weariness, the kind that comes after a long, brutal campaign. I had won. But the price of victory was a part of my own past, a part of my own identity, which was now dead and buried. I found myself wandering through the rooms of my house, a house that was now entirely, unequivocally mine. I'd run my hand over the arm of the sofa where Mark used to sit, or look at the empty space on the wall where a family portrait used to hang. The objects were the same, but they were hollowed out, stripped of their meaning. They no longer triggered memories, only a dull, empty ache. They were just things. Wood, fabric, and glass. The ghosts had been exorcised, but they had taken the history of the house with them, leaving behind a sterile, silent museum of a life that was no longer mine. Then, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. The screen displayed a picture of my father, standing proudly in his dress blues. I knew this call was coming. It was the final, unavoidable engagement of this war. I let it ring 3 times, took a steadying breath, and answered. "Heidi," my father's voice was stern, heavy with a formal disapproval I knew all too well. "Your mother told me everything. I can't believe it." I waited. I held my breath, waiting for the words I had craved my entire life. For a word of comfort. For an acknowledgement of my pain. For him to finally say, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." But it never came. "I know you're hurt, Heidi," he continued, his tone shifting from anger to a kind of weary lecture. "But she is still your sister. Blood is blood. Family is about forgiveness. You've gone too far. You're tearing this family apart. Your mother has been crying for days." Every word was a shard of glass grinding into an open wound, the familiar, soul-crushing pattern repeating itself one last time. Even now, after everything I had endured, after the blatant theft and the public humiliation, I was still the one at fault. I was still the strong one, the one who was expected to absorb the pain, to forgive the unforgivable, to hold the family together even as it was actively poisoning me. He wasn't seeing a daughter who had been betrayed. He was seeing a soldier who had broken rank, a subordinate who had disobeyed the unwritten rule that Chloe's happiness was always the primary objective. I listened patiently, not interrupting him once. I let him say everything he needed to say. When he finally finished, a heavy silence hung between us. It was in that silence that I remembered a quote I had come across from a Brené Brown lecture online. She said, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." It was time to be kind. To myself. "Dad," I said, and my voice was eerily calm, steady, and devoid of the pleading tone I had used with him my whole life. "I have spent my entire life being the strong one for this family. I have spent my life making room for Chloe's feelings while ignoring my own. I have fulfilled my duty as a daughter and a sister, over and over again." I paused, letting the words sink in, creating a space for what needed to come next. Now, I have a new duty, a primary duty, and that is my duty to myself. I took another breath. It felt like the cleanest, purest air I'd ever breathed. I forgive them. I forgive them for being weak and selfish and cruel. I forgive Mark for being a coward, and I forgive Chloe for being a parasite. But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It does not mean I will allow them back into my life to hurt me again. Forgiveness is for me. It's me putting down the weight of my anger so that I can finally move on. I forgive, but I do not forget. The boundary is drawn. "Goodbye, Dad." I ended the call before he could respond. I didn't give him a chance to argue, to lecture, to guilt me further. The conversation was over. The relationship, as it had existed, was over. After I hung up, I didn't cry. I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace settle over me. The final, heaviest weight had just been lifted from my shoulders. The lifelong, exhausting struggle for their approval, their recognition, their love. It was finally done. I had released myself from the burden of their expectations. I had liberated myself. I walked into my study and sat at my desk, the command center of my personal war. I opened the master folder on my laptop one last time. Operation Downfall. Inside were all the weapons I had gathered, the audio file, the photographs, the financial statements, the emails, my entire arsenal. With a steady hand, I dragged the entire folder into the trash icon on my desktop. Then, I moved the cursor over the icon, right-clicked, and selected Empty Trash. A small confirmation window popped up. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items?" One final, decisive click, and it was all gone. The war was well and truly over. Not because the enemy had been destroyed, but because I had finally chosen to walk off the battlefield. I had chosen my own peace. A year later, the sky over Montana is a perfect, impossible shade of blue. I'm sitting on the porch of a small rented log cabin, nursing a warm mug of coffee. In front of me, the majestic Absaroka Mountains pierce the horizon, their peaks still dusted with a hint of snow even in the late summer. This is the very place those 2 plane tickets were for, the trip I'd planned to celebrate a promotion and a future that turned out to be a lie. But sitting here now, alone, I don't feel lonely. I feel whole. The air is crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. There is a profound silence here, not the heavy, oppressive silence of my old house, but the living, breathing quiet of nature. It's the sound of absolute freedom. Life has changed in ways I never could have predicted. My role as an instructor at the Special Warfare School has been more fulfilling than I ever imagined. But my greatest achievement of the past year wasn't marked by a formal commendation or a plaque on the wall. It happened on Thursday nights, in a quiet corner of a coffee shop just off base near Fort Bragg. It started organically. A young female sergeant from another unit approached me after a training exercise, asking for advice on dealing with a condescending superior. I met her for coffee. She brought a friend the next time. Soon, I had a small, informal gathering of young servicewomen who would meet with me every week. We never talked about tactics or weaponry. We talked about life. We talked about what it means to be a strong woman in a world still dominated by men. We talked about dealing with bias, about balancing the immense demands of duty with a personal life, and about the crushing pressure to always be tougher, stronger, and better than everyone else just to be seen as equal. I never told them the full story of Operation Downfall. I didn't have to. I just shared the lessons. I talked about the vital importance of setting boundaries, of defining your own worth, and of understanding that your value is not determined by anyone else's opinion. Not your bosses, not your partners, and especially not your families. I had learned a quote from the great Maya Angelou that became my guiding principle. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. My own trauma, the deepest wound of my life, hadn't been a fatal blow. It had been transformed into a beacon, a lighthouse to help other women navigate their own treacherous waters. That became my true legacy. A few weeks ago, while scrolling through my phone, I saw a social media post from an old mutual acquaintance. It was a candid photo of Chloe. She was working behind the counter of a Greasy Spoon diner in some small, forgotten town in the Midwest. She looked older than her years, her face etched with a permanent, weary tension. The caption mentioned that the rumor was she and Mark had lasted only a few months on the road, their shared desperation quickly souring into bitter, mutual blame for their spectacular downfall. I stared at the photo for a long moment, searching for some emotion inside myself. Triumph? Pity? Vengeance? I felt nothing. It was like looking at a picture of a stranger from a life I'd never lived. The anger, the pain, the betrayal. It was all gone, erased by time and distance and a deliberate choice to let it all go. They were just ghosts from another world. I closed the app, took a deep breath of the cool mountain air, and let them fade away. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway pulls me from my thoughts. A dusty pickup truck rolls to a stop, and a man gets out. He's a former Navy SEAL I met during a joint training exercise a few months ago. He's holding 2 fishing rods and has a wide, easy smile on his face that seems to perfectly match the big sky around us. We don't talk about the past. We don't talk about old wars or old wounds. We talk about the future. About the mountain trail we plan to hike tomorrow, and about the cutthroat trout we hope to catch in the Yellowstone River this afternoon. Later, as the sun begins to dip below the mountains, painting the peaks in fiery shades of orange and purple, we sit on the porch, each with a cold beer in hand. I raise my bottle, the glass cool against my palm. I'm not toasting to revenge. I'm not celebrating a victory over my enemies. I'm toasting to my own rebirth, to a life that I am defining on my own terms. A life built not on the expectations of others, but on my own foundation of honor, resilience, and a hard-won peace. The final mission is complete, and I am ready for whatever comes next. And that's where I am today, under this big Montana sky. My war is over, not because I destroyed my enemies, but because I chose to build my own peace. Your story is different, the people, the places, the pain. But the battle to reclaim your life is one we all understand. If my journey has meant something to you, please hit the like button to show your support. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, and to join a community that knows what it means to stand tall. Finally, let the world know you're writing your own ending. In the comments below, just type 2 words, my chapter.